When Canada declared war on Germany on September 10, 1939, the citizens of Hamilton rose to the challenge. Men immediately began lining up to enlist and set off for the front. Over the next few years, Hamilton became a hotbed of military activity, with soldiers, sailors, and airmen marching through the streets. There were tearful farewells at the railway stations as wives and sweethearts said goodbye, maybe for the last time. The 40th Field Battery left Hamilton on June 24, 1940. As more and more men were sent overseas over the war years, there was a serious shortage of industrial workers. Women were enlisted to take up the cause, and a greater percentage of women workers were seen in Hamilton industry than at any other time in history. After a long 5 years, it was becoming obvious, at home and abroad, that the war in Europe was finally coming to an end. The Nazis were in retreat, and the Allied forces were advancing daily. Hamilton set up a V-Day committee of citizens, chaired by Sam Manson, in September 1944 to prepare for the victory celebrations. Householders were asked to prepare suitable decorations for their homes, and many business firms already had made arrangements to have patriotic displays in keeping with the occasion. By April 25, 1945, the committee, now known as the VE Day Committee, had finalized arrangements for the celebrations, and by May 3rd, all was ready to go. On Monday, May 7, 1945, people gathered outside the Spectator Building on King Street East to await the word. At just past noon, the Associated Press wire in the Hamilton Spectator newsroom came to life, announcing the official end of the war in Europe. Shortly afterwards, the extra edition of the Spectator hit the streets with the blaring headline, "Nazis Quit," and people snapped them up and held them out in triumph. Mayor Sam Lawrence then announced that the rest of Announcement Day would be a public holiday in addition to the statutory holiday declared for Tuesday, May 8th. Some citizens got into the spirit before the official celebrations were due to start. There was tape and confetti at King and James Streets, and an effigy of Hitler was burned on the post near the Beltline car stop. Boys who had somehow got to the roof of the 3-story building on the northeast corner of King and James Streets were throwing bags of flour onto the street below. Nobody seemed to mind. Most people trod the streets, waving flags, blowing toy horns, and wielding small noisemakers. Shopgirls streamed into the stores to stock up on Union Jacks and red ensigns in preparation for the celebrations. This is the flag counter in the Mills hardware store on King Street East. Local merchants, nervously anticipating the crowds who would be streaming downtown after the ceremonies, started boarding up their display windows. Here workers are busy boarding up the Heinzman piano store windows at King and Houston. Other stores, such as this one on Houston Street North, used the boards that protected their windows as patriotic displays, sporting the V for victory. The Eaton store on James Street North, as well as flying all the flags of the Allied forces, attached a giant V for victory to the front of their store. As the school children arrived downtown with their enthusiasm for a half-day off school fueling them, they marched around and around Gore Park, skipping and singing. Boys waved flags and cheered the victory at the corner of King and John Streets. As the industries released their workers to take part in the celebrations, many of them arrived downtown with their flags and paraded up and down King Street in their work clothes and kerchiefs, including this crowd of women marching along in front of Mills Hardware. Women with children in buggies rolled into downtown, and some even decorated their buggies with patriotic phrases and gave their children flags to wave. Months earlier, in anticipation of the victory, Hamilton City Council had ordered a giant Union Jack that was to be flown in Gore Park during the celebrations. Here staff get ready to raise the flag on the Gore Park flagpole at King and Houston. As cars raced down King Street blaring their horns in celebration, boys attached themselves to the running boards, bumpers, and hoods. In their enthusiasm, Some even painted victory slogans on their cars, with spelling taking second place to patriotism. Unfortunately, it was this sort of dangerous enthusiasm that led to the only fatality in Hamilton during the VE Day celebrations. Wallace Bavard, 15 years of age, was riding on the front bumper of a truck on King Street East near Ferguson Avenue. When it passed over the CN tracks, he tumbled off and struck his head. He died en route to the Hamilton General Hospital. The formal celebrations were to start at 2 p.m. in 4 different areas in Hamilton. City Works Department barricaded the downtown restricted area, which would be closed to all but the official parades. The people from the center of town and the center and west end of the mountain were to gather in the TH&B Plaza in front of the station on Hunter Street East. They were met by Master of Ceremonies William J. McCulloch and the 2nd Battalion Royal Hamilton Light Infantry Band, the Argyll and Sutherland Band, and the Veterans Trumpet Band. The people from the west end of the city were to gather in Victoria Park on King Street West. They were met by Master of Ceremonies Cecil Brown and singers Olaf Farmer and Stanley Jones, as well as local ministers. The people from the north end of the city were to gather at Woodlands Park on Barton Street East. They were met by the Sea Cadets Band, the Salvation Army Band, and the HMCS Star Band, seen here playing. Appearing at all 4 points across the city were Sam Manson and Murray Wickham of the VE Day Committee, Mayor Samuel Lawrence, seen here speaking to the crowd at Woodlands Park, and, immediately to his right, American Vice Consul Edwin Clay Merrill. The people from the east end of the city were to gather at Scott Park on King Street East and march into Civic Stadium. There they were met by Master of Ceremonies Edward Stewart and the Salvation Army Band, among many others. As the veterans of the Boer War and World War I marched into the stadium, a great cheer went up. The children gathered there sang Land of Hope and Glory in celebration of the victory by the Commonwealth. When the festivities in these locations were finished, the participants went home and later attended one of the many church services to celebrate the end of the war in Europe. There were also block parties, dancing in the street, and continued festivities in downtown Hamilton. On Tuesday, May 8th, VE Day, the city had scheduled 2 massive rallies, one to be held in Victoria Park and one to be held at Civic Stadium, both of which began with the playing of King George VI's message to the Commonwealth. In Victoria Park, the celebrants filled the bleachers. The Master of Ceremonies was Wilfred Machin. The band of the HMCS Star played along with the Argyll and Sutherlands. The singers were Thomas Jarrett, Olive Barlow Blakely, Helen Hunt, and John Rowcroft, and the local ministers were the Reverend William Brewer and the Reverend Ivan Morgan. At Civic Stadium, the Master of Ceremonies was Cecil Brown, Secretary General of the YMCA. The bands on the platform were the brass band of the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry and the No. 1 band of the Salvation Army Citadel, seen here. The singers were Olaf Farmer, Ann Davies Wynne, Herbert Main, and Stanley Jones. The local ministers were the Reverend William Preston and the Reverend Thomas Marshall. Ann Davies Wynne had emigrated from Wales to Hamilton in 1928. In 1970, Civic Stadium, where she sang in 1945 for VE Day, was named after her only son, Ivor Wynne. Mayor Lawrence and Vice Consul Merrill attended both rallies. Mr. Merrill asked for a minute's silence in memory of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had died less than a month before. Both rallies finished at about the same time, and the crowds, led by Sam Manson at Civic Stadium and Murray Wickham at Victoria Park, began to march towards the center of town. This is the parade from Victoria Park moving east along King Street West. The veterans of previous wars proudly wore their medals as they marched to celebrate victory. The various bands, including the Sea Cadet Band and the Women's Army Defense Corps Band, played military songs as they marched along King Street West. The crowds at Gore Park packed the downtown streets for the last official celebration of VE Day. The Spectator noted young and old, veterans of 2 world wars, women with baby buggies, elderly couples marching arm in arm. Thousands made the long march to the center of the city. Each parade is estimated to have been about 1.5 miles long. It was anyone's guess how many youngsters and men and women took part in the entire celebration. Estimates vary from 50,000 to 75,000. And they were all there, the flag waving, the cheering, the thoughtful, and the sad. One wondered how many of those civilians, particularly the elderly or middle-aged, who so sturdily kept up to the martial music of the bands, had lost a loved one so that VE Day could come to pass. Japan surrendered on August 14, 1945, and Hamilton celebrated VJ Day from 7 p.m. on that day until the early morning hours of August 16th. Unlike the VE Day celebrations, the VJ Day celebrations saw a great deal more damage, including the destruction and burning of a recruitment hut in Gore Park. A jubilant crowd on James Street North awaited the arrival on October 4, 1945, of the 40th Field Battery, the first unit of Hamilton soldiers to arrive back home. They disembarked at the Toronto, Hamilton and Buffalo Railway Station and marched downtown to a tumultuous welcome as families were finally reunited. The war was truly over.